15 meters beneath the sand at Saqqara, there is a hole in the ground that no living human being had looked into for 43 centuries. Picture the moment they found it. A narrow shaft, cut straight down through the rock, deeper than a 4-story building is tall. At the bottom of it, a single block of limestone. A sarcophagus, 45 tons of stone with a lid weighing another 5, and that lid was still sealed shut with mortar, exactly the way the workmen had left it around the year 2300 before Christ, sealed, untouched. In a country where almost every ancient tomb was robbed, sometimes within a generation of being closed, this one had been waiting in total darkness since before Moses, before the Trojan War, before the very idea of Rome existed. It took the team 2 hours of careful work to break that seal. And when the lead archaeologist put his head through the gap and shone a light inside, he saw a man covered head to foot in layers of gold. His name was written right there on the stone, Hekashepes. He was not a king. He was not a god. He was a wealthy official of the Old Kingdom, sent into eternity wrapped in gold leaf with a band across his brow and a bracelet on his chest. And for 4,300 years, he simply lay there in the dark, perfectly patient, waiting for someone to come back and listen. That is the thing almost nobody tells you about the ancient world. We talk about it as if it's finished, closed, solved, as if the great discoveries all happened 100 years ago and there's nothing left under the sand but souvenirs. That is completely wrong. The discovery I just described happened in 23. Some of what I'm about to show you happened in 2025. The ground is still talking. The dead are still being found. And the story they're telling is stranger and far more recent than you've been led to believe. So pull up a chair. Tonight we are going to listen to the ones who have been waiting. The golden man at the bottom of the shaft. A pharaoh who needed a passport. A queen identified by a single tooth. A queen we still cannot find. And doors in the desert that should not exist. Come on, let's go have a look. Let's stay at Saqqara for a moment, because Hekashepes did not come out of the ground alone. Saqqara is not really a single site. It's a vast city of the dead, the burial ground for the ancient capital of Memphis, and it sprawls for miles around the famous step pyramid of Djoser, Egypt's first pyramid, the building that taught the Egyptians how to stack stone toward the sky. People have been digging here for over a century, and the honest truth is that we have probably uncovered only a fraction of what's down there. In the same stretch of excavation that gave us the Golden Man, the team opened other tombs. One belonged to a man named Mary, and his title is one of the best job descriptions in all of history. He was a keeper of the secrets. He held the authority to perform sacred rituals that almost no one else was permitted to touch. A trusted right hand of the king. A man whose entire identity was built around knowing things other people were not allowed to know. Another tomb belonged to a priest tied to the pyramid complex of a 5th dynasty king. And another held statues so fine and so large that the excavators called them some of the most striking found at Saqqara in modern times. Sit with the scale of that for a second. This is one team in one season in one corner of one cemetery. And they pulled out a gold-covered nobleman, a keeper of royal secrets, and a gallery of statues that had been waiting in the dark since the Pyramid Age. That is not a civilization we have finished reading. That is a library we have barely opened. Now, when most people think of an Egyptian mummy, they think of one face, Tutankhamun, the boy king. And the legend is mostly true. He came to the throne as a child. He died at around 19, more than 3,000 years ago, and when Howard Carter found his tomb in 1922, the world genuinely lost its mind because almost uniquely, it was intact, not emptied by robbers, not stripped to the walls. Inside were thousands of objects, and at the heart of it, nested coffins, the innermost of which was made of solid gold. And here's what's remarkable. That boy is still teaching us. modern DNA analysis identified his parents, it revealed that he likely walked with difficulty. He had a club foot and a bone condition, and that he'd been hit by malaria, a teenager who ruled an empire, leaning on a cane, fighting off a fever that still kills people today. The mask gave us the myth. The body gave us the human being. But here's the part of Tut's story that doesn't make the postcards, and I think you should hear it, because it's the uncomfortable truth underneath the gold. When the archaeologists finally tried to remove Tutankhamun's mummy from his coffin in 1925, they couldn't. The embalmers had poured so much resin and oil over the body that over 3,000 years it had hardened like cement and glued the boy king to the bottom of his own solid gold coffin. They set the whole thing out in the Egyptian sun, hour after hour, hoping the heat would loosen it. It didn't budge, so they made a decision that's hard to read about even now. To get him out and to examine him, they took him apart. They cut the body at the hips. They detached the arms. They used heated knives to separate his head from that famous golden mask. Each piece was treated, documented, and later pieced back together with resin. They believed they were preserving him. By the standards of the time, they were being careful. But the result is that one of the most protected human beings who ever lived, sealed in gold, hidden for millennia, was ultimately dismantled on a table by the very people who came to admire him. Remember that, because it's a theme that's going to come back tonight. The greatest danger to the ancient dead has very often been us. If Tutankhamun is the most famous pharaoh, then the most powerful was almost certainly the man we call Ramesses the Great. Ramesses II ruled for around 66 years. Let that land, 6 decades on the throne, at a time when most people were lucky to see 30. He lived to roughly 90. He fathered so many children that the records struggle to count them, well over 100 by some accounts. He built on a scale that was almost arrogant, plastering his name across temples up and down the Nile, as if daring the future to forget him. And the future very nearly did the opposite of forgetting, because his story has one of the strangest endings in all of archaeology. After he died, Ramesses was buried in the Valley of the Kings, and then robbed, like almost everyone else. The priests of a later age, desperate to protect their dead kings from looters, gathered up the violated royal mummies and hid them together in a secret cache in the cliffs. Ramesses lay in that hidden bundle of kings until 1881, when it was finally found. But that's not the strange part. The strange part is what happened in the 20th century. By the 1970s, the mummy of Ramesses the Great was deteriorating. A fungus was attacking him, and the best laboratory to treat him was in Paris. The problem was bureaucratic, and it is genuinely one of my favorite facts in history. You cannot legally move a person, even a 3,000-year-old one, across an international border without papers. So the modern Egyptian government issued Ramesses II an official passport. His occupation, listed on the document, was king. And when his remains arrived in France, he was reportedly received with the honors due to a visiting head of state. A man who died over 3,000 years ago was given a passport, flew to Paris, and was greeted like a sitting monarch. The Egyptians built their kings to be eternal. They could not possibly have imagined how eternal, so we can find the kings. The harder and frankly more human story is the search for the queens. And it starts with a detective puzzle solved by a single tooth. Hatshepsut was one of the most successful rulers Egypt ever had. A woman who took the full power of Pharaoh, ruled for around 2 decades, launched ambitious trade expeditions, and raised stunning monuments. But when her tomb was explored, her sarcophagus was empty. Her body was simply gone. For a long time, one of Egypt's greatest rulers was a missing person. The breakthrough came from an unglamorous place. In a separate find, there was a small wooden box inscribed with Hatshepsut's name. The kind of box used to hold sacred remains. And inside it, among other things, was a single molar tooth. Meanwhile, in a modest nearby tomb, there lay an unidentified female mummy with a gap in her jaw where a molar should have been. When researchers compared the tooth in the labeled box to that gap, it fit. Down to the fraction of a millimeter, it fit. A lost pharaoh, recovered by matching a tooth to the hole it left behind. That is the kind of patient, unglamorous brilliance real archaeology runs on. Not curses, not lasers, a tooth, a box, and a measurement. But for every Hatshepsut we recover, there's a Nefertiti we can't. You know her face even if you don't know her story. That impossibly elegant painted bust, the long neck, the level gaze, the cheekbones. Her name itself is a kind of boast made true. It translates roughly to, "The beautiful one has come." She was the great royal wife of a pharaoh who tried to overturn Egypt's entire religion. And by every surviving account, she was extraordinarily powerful, admired, feared, and resented in equal measure. She was almost certainly connected to Tutankhamun himself, very likely as his stepmother. And we have no idea where she is. Her mummy has never been confidently identified. There are candidates, there are theories, there are tantalizing mummies in the record that might be her, and prominent Egyptologists have argued more than once that they're closing in. But I want to be honest with you in the way this channel always tries to be. As of now, nobody can stand up and say, with proof, this is Nefertiti. The most famous face of the ancient world is still somewhere, a body without a name. If and when DNA and modern scanning finally settle it, it will be one of the discoveries of the century. We're not there yet. We're just close enough to feel it. And then there's the queen, who, according to legend, never wanted to be found at all. Cleopatra. First, let's kill the cartoon. The Cleopatra in your head, the seductress, the femme fatale who ruined powerful men with her beauty, is largely a hit job. That image was deliberately manufactured by her enemy, the Roman Octavian, who needed to paint her as a dangerous foreign temptress to justify going to war. The real Cleopatra was a political genius. She spoke many languages. She was the first ruler of her Greek dynasty to actually bother learning Egyptian. She understood economics and diplomacy, and she spent her entire reign playing the most dangerous game on earth, keeping Egypt independent while Rome swallowed the world. Her life reads like a thriller. Locked in a power struggle with her own brother, she had herself smuggled into Julius Caesar, wrapped, by the famous account, in a sack or carpet, and emerged to win him as an ally and a lover. She bore a son many believed was Caesar's. After Caesar was assassinated, she aligned with Mark Antony, and the two of them took on Octavian for control of the Roman world. They lost decisively at the naval battle of Actium in 31 BC. Within a year, cornered in Alexandria, both were dead. Antony by his own sword and Cleopatra by her own hand at just 39. The asp, the venomous snake. That's the legend. The truth is, we don't actually know how she died, and we may never. Here's a fact to recalibrate your sense of time, and the source I rebuilt this from got it exactly backwards, so let me state it correctly. Cleopatra lived closer in time to the moon landing than to the building of the Great Pyramid. The pyramids were already impossibly ancient to her. She was as far from their construction as we are from the High Middle Ages. Egypt's history is so long that its most famous queen is practically our contemporary by comparison. And we still haven't found her tomb. But someone has spent over 20 years getting closer than anyone in history. Her name is Kathleen Martinez, and she didn't start as an archaeologist at all. She was a lawyer who became so convinced that history had been unjust to Cleopatra that she taught herself the field and went to Egypt to make her case in the ground. Most experts assume Cleopatra lies somewhere under modern Alexandria, likely lost beneath the sea. Martinez has a different idea. She believes the queen may rest at a temple site called Taposiris Magna, dedicated to the goddess Isis, Cleopatra's own patron deity. And here's why it's more than a hunch. At that temple, Martinez's team has pulled up coins stamped with Cleopatra's face, tying the queen directly to the site. They found a foundation deposit confirming the temple was dedicated to Isis, the proof she needed that this was the right kind of sacred ground. And then they found something that made the hair stand up. A tunnel, cut into the rock, running from the temple toward the Mediterranean, part of it now underwater. She brought in one of the most famous underwater explorers alive, the man who found the Titanic, and off that coast, they located massive submerged stone structures where the ancient shoreline used to be. Now, the honest part, because it matters. None of this proves Cleopatra is there. Martinez herself is careful about that. It is a theory, a powerful, patiently built, genuinely thrilling theory, supported by real evidence, but unconfirmed. What's not in doubt is that this woman has turned a lawyer's stubbornness into one of the most compelling searches in modern archaeology. And if she's right, we are one tunnel away from finding the last pharaoh of Egypt. And this is the exact moment I want to stop and actually talk to you, because your answer to this changes what I make next. I've now put a real choice in front of you. If you could send a team underground tomorrow, full funding, no limits, and have them open just one of these mysteries, which would it be? Would you go for Cleopatra's tomb under that flooded tunnel? Would you finally put a name to Nefertiti's body? Or would you go somewhere we haven't even reached yet tonight? Tell me down in the comments then, and tell me why. I read them. I genuinely read them. The arguments you start in that comment section are how I decide which story this channel digs into next. So don't just lurk on this one, plant your flag. And if you're finding this even half as fascinating as I do me one small favor and hit subscribe before you scroll on, because the next part is about a door that by every rule we thought we knew should not exist. All right, back into the ground. In 2025, not a century ago last year, a team back at Saqqara uncovered something that stopped even the veterans cold. A door, but not just any door. It was carved from a single slab of pink granite standing about 4.5 meters tall, nearly 15 feet, and it was the largest of its kind ever found in Egypt. Pink granite was an expensive, prestige material. You didn't quarry and haul it for just anyone. The whole face of it was covered in hieroglyphs listing the titles of the man it honored: hereditary prince, governor, royal scribe, vizier, judge, chanting priest. A resume in stone for someone who clearly mattered enormously. His name was Prince Wazir-if-Re, a son of the king who founded Egypt's 5th dynasty. And here's the strange thing. Before this discovery, he had been almost entirely missing from history. A prince of one of the most important families in the ancient world, and we barely knew he'd lived. Now here's the trick of the door. It was a false door. It didn't open. In Egyptian belief, a false door was a symbolic gateway, a threshold the spirit of the dead could pass through between this world and the next, even though no living body ever could. So normally, that's where the story ends. A beautiful, sealed, symbolic slab. Except this one had a real entrance hidden near it. And what it led to is where things get genuinely weird in the best way. Inside, the team found a group of statues depicting King Djoser, the builder of that very first step pyramid, along with his wife and his 10 daughters. And that makes no sense on the surface because Djoser lived centuries before this prince. So what were statues of a much older king doing in a later prince's tomb? The leading explanation is that the statues were relocated there, thousands of years after they were carved during a much later period, possibly to protect them, possibly because they were still being honored. In other words, the ancient Egyptians were curating their own ancient history, moving sacred objects from one age into another like a civilization building a museum out of its own past. And there was more. A second pink granite entrance bearing the name of yet another king, and a set of 13 pink granite statues seated in a row on high-backed chairs, some of them headless, one black granite figure toppled over face down. We don't fully understand the arrangement yet. The excavation isn't even finished. The burial chamber itself still hasn't been reached. Which means everything I just told you is the opening of that story, not the end of it. Now, let me take you somewhere you might not expect a pyramid at all. The Judean Desert, near the Dead Sea. In 2025, a team that was actually out there racing to save antiquities from looters found, on a lonely hilltop overlooking the Dead Sea, a large structure built from hand-cut stones, each one weighing hundreds of pounds, piled into a shape that, from a distance, looks like a pyramid. For a long time, people assumed from its shape that it was very old, going back to the era of the Hebrew Bible's first temple. The excavation proved them wrong. It's younger than that. Built around 2,200 years ago in the Hellenistic period, in the chaotic centuries after Alexander the Great died and his generals carved his empire into pieces, with the Greek dynasty of the Ptolemies ruling Egypt and the surrounding lands. And it had kept its contents beautifully, because the desert is one of the great preservers on Earth, too dry for mold, too dry for rot. The team pulled out fragments of papyrus documents, bronze coins bearing the faces of Hellenistic kings, weapons, wooden tools, even scraps of fabric and furniture, all from over 2,000 years ago. So what was it? Honestly, we're still arguing. Some think it was a tomb, some think it was a monument, but one of the strongest ideas is the least romantic and, to me, the most human. That it was a guard tower and a way station, watching over an ancient trade route that hauled salt and other Dead Sea resources to the coast, possibly a place where officials stopped travelers and collected taxes. A pyramid-shaped toll booth at the edge of the empire. 2,000 years later, the paperwork survived in the sand, and we're still trying to read the receipts. And that same desert, that same survey racing against the looters, has been giving up treasures that sound almost impossible. In one cliff cave, reachable only by rope, archaeologists found fragments of biblical scrolls written in Greek, new pieces of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that famous library of ancient texts. In the same region, they found the partial remains of a child who died around 6,000 years ago, so well preserved by the dry air that skin and hair and tendons still clung to the bones. And they found a woven basket, an ordinary, humble basket made of plant fiber, that turned out to be more than 10,000 years old, possibly the oldest basket in the world, woven by human hands 1,000 years before anyone in the region had invented pottery. In another cave, they recovered a scrap of fabric smaller than your fingernail, around 3,800 years old, dyed a deep scarlet red. That tiny rag is the oldest known evidence anywhere of cloth dyed with a red pigment made from insects, a color so difficult to produce that it was reserved for the sacred and the powerful. And in yet another twist, scientists took an ancient seed recovered from this region and roughly 1,000 years old, and they grew it. It sprouted. It became a living tree, now around 10 feet tall, possibly from a lineage long thought extinct, possibly connected to a healing plant named in ancient texts. A seed slept for 1,000 years and then chose to wake up. That's the thing the desert keeps proving. The past isn't always dust. Sometimes it's a scroll you can still read, a basket you could still carry, a color still bright after 4,000 years, a seed that's still alive. Now, after everything I told you about what we did to Tutankhamun, cutting him apart to study him, there's a quieter, more careful kind of story I want to leave you with, because we did learn. And some of the dead we now choose to leave alone. There is a mummy known as the Bashiri mummy, sitting in Cairo, sometimes called the Untouchable One. It dates to the late Greek-influenced period of Egypt, and it is wrapped with such astonishing, intricate skill, a pattern across the face that some say resembles the base of a pyramid, that no researcher has ever dared to unwrap it, not because of a curse, because of humility. They know that if they open it, they can never put it back the way the embalmers did, and they'd rather preserve the mystery intact than destroy it for a look inside. so we study it with scans instead, learning what we can through the wrappings, and we let it rest. And sometimes the dead surprise us through those scans in ways no one saw coming. There's a mummy studied in recent years that had been cataloged for a long time as a male priest, because it was lying in a male priest's coffin. The trouble is, coffins got mixed up and traded over the centuries, and the body inside didn't match the box. When researchers actually scanned it, they discovered the person inside was not only a woman, but a pregnant one, carrying a child, embalmed together around 2,000 years ago. A whole human story, a mother and an unborn baby hidden inside the wrong name for 2 millennia, revealed without ever disturbing the wrappings. That's the difference modern care makes. We don't have to take them apart anymore to hear them. And I want to be clear before we close, this is not only an Egyptian story. The whole planet has been quietly preserving its dead and handing them back to us. High in the Alps, in 1991, hikers found a body so well preserved that the authorities first assumed he was a modern climber who died recently. He wasn't. He was over 5,000 years old, a Copper Age man we now call Utsi, frozen into a mountain pass with his tools, his last meals, and even his ailments still readable in his tissue. We know he had arthritis, we know what he ate, we know he'd sharpened his gear shortly before he died. In China, in a tomb sealed for 2,000 years, they found a noblewoman now known as the Lady of Dai, preserved so completely by the airless, sealed conditions of her tomb that her skin was still soft and her limbs still moved. And in another Chinese case, a centuries-old Buddhist statue turned out, on a medical scan, to have a mummified monk folded inside it. A man who very likely began the agonizing process of mummifying himself through years of starvation diet in pursuit of a kind of holiness. His body cavities later found packed with scraps of writing, different continents, different beliefs, the same stubborn human refusal to simply vanish. Before I let you go, I owe you a line I draw very deliberately on this channel. The line between what we know and what we only wish we knew. There are real, genuine mysteries left, out at a site called Zawiat El Aryan near Giza. An explorer well over a century ago dug down to an unfinished structure and found, sealed at the bottom, a strange oval vat carved from polished pink granite with a dark residue inside. To this day, there's debate about exactly what it was and why it was sealed so carefully. That's a real open question, and I'll happily sit in that mystery with you. What I won't do is sell you the fantasy that's been bolted onto places like that. The claims that the pyramids were secret power plants or water pumps or machines for generating electricity. I looked hard at those, and I'll tell you plainly, there is no credible evidence for any of it. It's a story people want to be true, dressed up to look like science, and the actual truth that human beings with rope and stone and astonishing organization built these things by hand to carry their dead into eternity is far more impressive than any made-up machine. Because here's what all of this really tells us. From the golden man in the shaft to the seed that came back to life, we have not finished reading the ancient world. We've barely started. There are bodies still without names. There are tombs we haven't reached the bottom of. There's a queen at the end of a flooded tunnel, waiting. The sand is not a graveyard where the story ended. It's an archive that's still open. And every single year it hands us another page. So the next time someone tells you the ancient world is a closed book, you'll know better. The dead are still talking. The ground is still giving them up. And we are the lucky few alive at the exact moment we finally have the tools to listen. If you want to be here when the next page comes out of the earth, the next sealed door, the next nameless face finally named, then subscribe and turn on the bell, because that is exactly what this channel lives for. Tell me in the comments which mystery you'd open first. I'll be reading every one. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay curious.